What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Wrestling Decoded. And today we're doing something a little different with this list. Every backstage fight story in wrestling gets passed around the same way. Locker room to podcast to YouTube comment section, gaining a little exaggeration at every stop along the way. So instead of just rattling off 10 stories and asking you to trust me blindly, I'm going to rank these by how solid the actual evidence behind them is, starting with the ones that are more he said, she said, and working our way up to the one story that's basically undisputed wrestling history at this point. By the end of this, you'll know exactly which of these to bring up confidently at a bar and which ones to preface with allegedly according to one guy's book. Let's get into it. If you like getting the real story behind wrestling's legends instead of just the highlight reel version everyone already knows, that's exactly what this channel is built around. Go ahead and subscribe now before we start counting these down. Kicking things off on the shakier end of the evidence scale, Big Show versus the Great Khali. According to Chris Jericho's own book, this one started because Khali kept imitating Big Show's signature overhand chop backstage, and Show eventually confronted him about it directly. Words turned into punches between the two seven-footers, and neither man could really land anything decisive until Show took a wild swing, missed completely, tripped over a folding chair, and ended up flat on the ground with Khali landing on top of him. Here's why this one sits in the shaky tier. Show himself has said he considers it a loss purely because he ended up on the bottom at the end, but by most accounts, nobody actually won this cleanly. It's remembered more as two giants embarrassing themselves in real time than any kind of decisive victory for either side. Right alongside it, Yoshi Tatsu versus Sheamus, a great example of a story where the why is genuinely disputed, even though the who won absolutely isn't. One version says Sheamus kept stealing Tatsu's protein shaker repeatedly, and it finally escalated into a real confrontation. Another version, coming specifically from Conan, claims the actual root issue was Sheamus owing Tatsu money, and the shaker incident was just the spark that lit an already loaded situation. What every single version does agree on, though, is this. Sheamus challenged Tatsu without realizing Tatsu had legitimate boxing training and background training out of the New Japan dojo system, and got handled decisively for making that assumption. Moving up a tier now, into stories that are corroborated by multiple witnesses, even without any actual footage existing. Kurt Hennig versus Brock Lesnar from May 5th, 2002. This one played out on a flight home from a UK pay-per-view, with the entire traveling party several drinks deep after a delayed takeoff, got everyone stuck at the airport bar longer than planned. Hennig, himself a legitimately accomplished amateur wrestler in his own right, reportedly started needling Lesnar, an actual NCAA champion, insisting he was the superior grappler of the two. It turned physical in the aisle of the plane, and Lesnar took Hennig down. Multiple wrestlers who were actually on that flight have corroborated the broad strokes of this story consistently over the years, even if the exact blow-by-blow details shift slightly depending on who happens to be telling it. AJ Styles versus JBL comes next, and this one's got a much clearer motive behind it than most entries on this list. JBL had a well-documented reputation throughout his career for hazing newer or smaller talent, and Styles was reportedly on the receiving end of that treatment during an overseas tour, condescending remarks constantly and allegedly having a drink spilled on him on purpose more than once. When Styles finally had enough and retaliated, other wrestlers stepped in to separate the two of them, but the confrontation continued anyway, ending with Styles landing a clean shot that gave the much larger JBL a genuine black eye. The detail that pushes this one past simple gossip is that it's been corroborated by other people who separately witnessed JBL's broader pattern of behavior toward other talent, not just this one isolated incident. Booker T versus Batista follows that same pattern of solid corroboration. Booker himself has discussed this fight directly on record in interviews, describing a roughly 5-minute verbal argument that escalated into actual blows, and by his own account, the physical part of it was over in about 30 seconds flat. He's been refreshingly candid about it too, saying plainly that you shouldn't call someone out to a fight without knowing their real-world background first, which, in his telling, was exactly the mistake Batista made that day. Quick pause here. Genuinely curious, drop a comment on which of these you personally find most believable, because I'd argue the JBL story might be the most consistently corroborated of the bunch, but I want to hear where you land on it. Ric Flair versus Eric Bischoff belongs in this same range too, and it comes with real documented history behind it rather than just standard locker room gossip. Back in WCW, when Bischoff was Flair's boss, tensions were already sitting at a breaking point. Bischoff had reportedly threatened at one point to sue Flair into homelessness over a missed television taping. Years later, both men ended up working together again, this time as fellow performers inside WWE. And Flair, with Arn Anderson literally standing guard at the door to keep it private, confronted Bischoff and slapped him. A detail as specific as Arn Anderson watching the door is exactly the kind of thing that pushes a story past exaggerated legend and into something several people can independently verify happened. Now, we're into stories that are publicly acknowledged, sometimes even by the people directly involved, and in one case, even caught on camera. Kurt Angle versus Daniel Puder back in 2004 fits right here because, unlike almost everything else on this list, part of this actually happened on live television in front of an unsuspecting audience. It was framed as a routine Master Lock Challenge segment where Angle regularly invited anyone in the audience to try escaping his ankle lock, except Puder happened to be a legitimate amateur wrestler being evaluated for a contract at the time, and he took the invitation seriously. Multiple eyewitnesses have said Puder was genuinely getting the better of Angle in real time before agents rushed the segment to a close, before it could turn into a real embarrassment for one of the company's most legitimately decorated athletes live on the air. Buff Bagwell versus Shane Helms sits comfortably here as well, backed by WWE's own internal handling of the situation afterward. Bagwell reportedly kept telling Helms he'd never be a real draw following WCW's buyout. Helms fired back a comment about Bagwell's physique. Bagwell slapped him across the face for it, and Helms responded by throwing a water bottle that busted his head wide open. What genuinely moves this one from rumor into confirmed fact is that WWE management actually investigated the incident afterward, concluded Bagwell was the one at fault, and released him from the company shortly after. An actual internal paper trail behind a backstage fight is about as confirmed as these stories realistically get. And right at the very top now, the stories that are essentially undisputed wrestling history at this point. Vader's reputation precedes him here. Separate, corroborated incidents involving both Paul Orndorff back in 1995 and Ken Shamrock during his WWF run get described consistently the same way across multiple different wrestlers' own retellings, completely independent of each other. When that many unrelated people, with zero reason to coordinate their stories, all describe the same man the exact same way, that's about as close to verified as oral wrestling history realistically gets. And finally, the one story that isn't really treated as a rumor at all anymore, it's simply accepted wrestling history. Bret Hart versus Vince McMahon, immediately following the Montreal Screwjob back in November of 1997. There's no actual video footage of the punch itself, but literally every single person who was in that room that night has told a consistent version of what happened. Hart confronted McMahon directly over what went down in the ring and dropped him with one shot, blackening his eye and spraining his ankle in the process. This isn't disputed by anyone, including people from McMahon's own camp, and it's been documented on film through Wrestling with Shadows. Out of everything on this entire list, this is the one that fully crossed over from locker room legend into permanent wrestling record. So here's the actual takeaway running through all 10 of these stories. The less official documentation something has, the more it tends to shift and grow with every retelling. But the stories that survive real scrutiny, the ones multiple unrelated people independently confirm the exact same way, those are the ones that genuinely earned their place in wrestling history instead of just wrestling gossip. Which one surprised you the most? the shakier ones at the start, or finding out just how solid some of these actually turned out to be? Let me know down in the comments. And if you want more of these deep dives into what's actually verified in wrestling history versus what's just legend, make sure you're subscribed to Wrestling Decoded. There's plenty more of this coming.